All right, welcome back to the Desert Harvest. We talk about Arizona's culinary bounty. Got my partner in crime, Oren. And look, Oren, this is what I heard. I heard that beer is proof that God loves us and wants us to be happy. Do you know who said that?
Uh, Somebody old.
Somebody old Ben Franklin said that. Are
Nice.
you smarter than a founding father? Like that's some wisdom, okay? That's not something we can argue with.
Nice. I love it. I named Brady, my 18-year-old son. His middle name is Benjamin,
Oh,
named
no
after
kidding.
Ben Franklin.
Ben Franklin. Okay, see?
I
So
happened to be reading a biography of Ben Franklin when Diana was pregnant with. So, so
there we go.
hey, so my my first love in Arizona was, don't tell Diana this
Okay,
because
it's
she'll
between
kill
you
me.
and no one. Yeah, no
Yeah,
one's listening. Don't worry.
was Arizona's craft beer. That's the reason I moved out here. Don't tell. She thinks it's because of her, but no, I'm just kidding. But it is a great scene, and I'm excited to talk about it today.
Well, look, for those of you listening, we have a sort of a episode that talks in general about Arizona wine, and we'd encourage you to go listen to that. And we're going to talk to Arizona winemakers in the future here. And today we thought we would talk in a similar manner about Arizona beer, because as it turns out, uh, at least to me, I was surprised at the depth of our beer making heritage in the state. And it's a thriving scene right now. So, Warren, there's like so much here to talk about. You know, you want to lay a little historical context before we get into the
Well,
current of
actually,
it?
yes. So I was at Uncle Bear's right up the road from where we both live. They
Hmm.
have this cool brewery bar. Have you ever been there?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
and it's like they have an arcade now, so my kids love to go there. Very family friendly. And they had this book, this like tabletop book called Brewing Arizona: A Century of Beer in the Grand Canyon State by Ed Sipos, I believe is his name.
Okay.
It's a fantastic history book of Arizona that he ties to the brewery scene, the beer scene since you know, the 1800s.
Hmm.
And the pioneers of Arizona were also the pioneers of Arizona brewing. And a lot of that started down in southern Arizona, which is pretty interesting. And a lot of it had to do with uh, the surveyors that were coming out here. That's how Carl Hayden started Hayden Flour
Okay.
Mills. He was a surveyor. So these guys were coming out here before Arizona was a state, and surveying the land and getting to know the land and falling in love with it and saying we can do a lot here, and it's the Wild West. Let's do it. And
Right.
so there's some great stories here about brewing and this complete, like, I to me, moving out here in 2011, and visiting for several years before that, I knew like the classics: Four Peaks,
Right.
Santan Brewing. Um, those were like these pretty established
Hmm.
like breweries that are hot, right? And they still
Sure.
are.
Right.
But when you look at the history of Arizona brewing, like, they're the new guys.
Yes.
There was this beer called A1 beer. Do you remember A1 beer?
I don't know that I do. I mean, I have a recollection of it, but I can't like picture the label or
The
anything like
way
that.
the way they talk about it in this book is you couldn't go buy a convenience store, supermarket, anywhere without
Okay.
an A1 beer sign out front. So, and then there were all these breweries. So I think the platform that has created this incredible brewing community here in Arizona, there's currently 109 brewing companies.
Oh my gosh.
Some of them have 10 locations.
Right, right,
So I think there's over 500 actual breweries,
right.
but there's 109 brewing companies. I think in 5 years, that's grown by over double. So it was only 50 like 5 years ago,
No
and now
kidding.
they're at 109.
Yeah. Well, I have to tell you, I mean, I stopped drinking beer for a period in my life because the beers that were in my circle of knowledge, I felt like weren't terribly interesting or complex, and so if I was drinking alcohol, is usually cocktails, usually tequila or wine, because those were the most interesting things that were in my on my palate. And then
Mhm.
in the last 10 years, I definitely have returned to drinking beer with um, where I think about it in the same way that I think about selecting tequila. I mean, that there's so many beers out there right now that are unique in their flavor profile. The ABV is all over the charts. I've kind of learned that the hard way a little bit, like not recognizing,
Mhm.
oh, hold on a
Yeah,
second.
I've been paying more attention to that as well.
Yeah, like what I think is just a beer may be, may hit much harder than I realize. But to me, that's part of like the interesting nature of it. And you and I have worked with, several local beer makers to pair their extraordinary creations with food in a way that people
Mhm.
do with wine pairing. Um, the Vanguard, the Four Peaks, the OGs, Santan, certainly been here, but there's a whole kind of new guard presenting themselves there. Could you tell
Mhm.
us a little bit about like what's going on right now?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing about brewing and why it's blown up so much as far as the number of breweries, most of those are microbreweries.
Right.
So they're really only brewing for themselves. They're not trying to create this big distribution
Yeah.
network. So you go to their brewery and I guess from what I understand, canning machines have become much more readily available. And
Interesting.
and so that's why you're seeing like these really small microbreweries. Like it might just be a neighborhood microbrewery that has its own cans now that are available for retail. That's a great part. Arizona has done a great job with the liquor laws over the
Hmm.
last couple of decades to allow for this. And then, of course, they even allow distilling now, breweries to distill. There are still some arcane laws, but getting back to your point or your question, the micro the micro breweries are really what's growing right now. There's not too many breweries opening that have the size of like a Four Peaks or
Right.
Santan that are in every grocery store, in the Southwest,
Hmm.
even Mother Road. Um, so but these are the breweries that are really kind of the new guard are, Arizona Wilderness. We're going to talk a lot about them today, not just because of their brewing and the popularity of their breweries. They have two. They also have this wonderful tasting room called Woodnote Cellars, and you can go taste their new releases completely free. You just go to in their brewing facility in Gilbert, and they have them every other Saturday, and you go in and the owners and the brewers are there and they're tasting these new beers. It's really a cool experience, but they're doing a lot to give back to the Arizona ecology.
Hmm.
Hence, their whole brand, Arizona Wilderness, is about their love of, hiking and being out in nature, and they don't want to disrupt that with, production practices for beer. So they actually have a beer called This Beer Saves Water.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the
I've
name of
seen
the
that. Yeah. Tell us about
beer.
that. This beer saves water.
Yeah, so it's made with drought resistant crops. The Sinagua malt is what they use in almost all their beers, which is it grows very well in the desert climates. So they're able to support local growers here,
Hmm.
and that product is not demanding a lot of water. It's a very hardy product, and they use a lot of white Sonoran wheat, which, as we continue to explore baking
Right.
here and the local grain economy here in Arizona, we're going to talk a lot about white Sonoran wheat, and several of their beers feature white Sonoran wheat.
Hmm.
And white Sonoran wheat, again, it was bought over by the Spanish, but it adapted so well to the desert climate here because the roots dig down so deep. So you don't need to water it. They find water even in our, arid
Yeah,
climate. And that also does wonders for the soil. So white Sonoran wheat is giving us so much. It's giving us wonderful bread like Barrio bread,
right.
um, Don Guerra, who we'll be talking a lot about and hopefully with, um, and also these beers. It's just so unreal that they're able to do that. So that's why, basically the way they say it is every pint of this beer saves water,
Right.
um, helps to offset more than 50 gallons of water for Arizona's waterways. That's insane. That's a big statement. It's right on their menu. And then they really support Dax and Oatman Farm.
Right.
They have the regenerative desert wheat, so they're using Dax's um, Sonoran White, which is a
Hmm.
regenerative. So, that's a big deal. The things that they're doing. And then I saw the other day that they have a Kernza beer, which Kernza is this phenomenal perennial wheat product that it was basically designed and created by the Salina Land Institute,
Right.
which is Wes Jackson. He's like a god among men in the
Hmm.
world of, sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture. And he created this Kernza. It's like their life's mission at that institute. And basically it's a perennial wheat, so you don't have to replant it. So all these issues with Monsanto and, seed saving and all this stuff, it goes away because
Right.
you plant it once and it keeps coming back every year like Bermuda grass, and you harvest it and you're off to the races. And they've been cultivating this for decades.
So I mean, we talk about the virtuous cycle in a lot of different ways here, and we're talking about beer, but while you're sitting in your home or out somewhere having your beer, sitting in front of you is something that is the final product of like this long chain of events.
Hmm.
And so we talk about something like this beer saves water. I mean, you're trying to make it as explicit as possible that, hey, back this beer begins with something that grows in the ground. And there's a lot of choices about
Hmm.
what we want to grow. And we're growing something that fits naturally with where we live. And by integrating with the needs of nature here, we're producing this product. Part of my contention, Oren, and maybe we can talk a little bit about flavor, is that these products that work the most in harmony with nature are actually the ones that produce the most delicious products. So when
Oh
we
yeah.
introduce these ideas, that when you're selecting your choice of beer, that thinking about, hey, where does this product begin with? Um, if it comes out and the flavor isn't good, there's no way that we get adoption to even ask the question anymore. Because then you're like, well, listen, I appreciate that, but I don't want to drink this because it doesn't taste good. So can you talk a little bit about how that beer tastes?
Yeah, I mean, and that's a good point. We jumped right into the agricultural part, but the breweries here have built most of them have been built around the IPA.
Hmm.
And the reason for that, of what I've learned, is that IPAs are much more forgiving in our temperature zone. So they're
Okay.
easier to brew in warmer temperatures. It's a little more forgiving.
Hmm.
And so, you think of the Santans Mother Road. I mean, they're built on their hoppy IPA.
Hmm.
And I think that was influenced somewhat by some of the California big breweries, and Sierra Nevada, all
Right.
these Western brewery Stone, all these great breweries that um, probably influenced early brewing here. But the IPA really led the charge, and still does. And like, with me, like beers, I have different beers that I like. Like,
Hmm.
I like porters and stouts a lot.
Right. Yes. Yes.
and like I love Guinness because
Sure. Yeah.
it's a lighter beer, but um I've become a huge IPA fan, and that really happened when I moved here.
Yeah.
I wasn't much of an IPA guy before I moved here, but you can't go wrong. It's like it's like, I mean, it's like water here. Like you drinking an IPA, you might, it's like, I think it comes out of the faucets in some counties, but so these beers are incredible. Okay, so let's just talk about like Mother Road,
Right.
Tower Station IPA,
Yeah.
widely considered the most popular IPA in Arizona. I would probably argue that in the Southwest. I was at the Grand Canyon with my son we did a 2-day hike recently, and Mother Road was being featured in every restaurant outlet in the Grand Canyon. And it's brewed in Flagstaff, so it's fairly close. But there was like no other beer there. It was like Mother
Right. Right.
Road. Um, I think that speaks a lot. And that's, you've got, probably millions of visitors to the Grand Canyon every year, I would imagine. And, they're being exposed to, I mean, I don't think Xanterra, who does we got to talk to these guys, by the way,
Okay.
but I don't think they'd be doing this just out of the goodness of their heart. It's very obvious that they're willing to stick their necks out with this beer brand and say, hey, this is like some seriously good beer. You're going to love it. I don't care where you're from. You're coming from the Far East, from South America, from Africa, Europe. You're going to love this beer. And people do. So the quality of the beer here is unbelievable.
So yeah,
Yeah.
when I talk about my return to being a beer drinker, I think about the arc of my experience with alcohol. Like many teenagers, the alcohol is about the drug. Like
Hmm.
I'm drinking it not because I'm looking for notes of one thing or another. I'm drinking I'm drinking
Yeah.
beer,
Yeah.
underage, not because of it as food. And that arc for me of alcohol becoming food, um, more than drug, right? Like the
Hmm.
alcohol affects us as a drug, and it is what it is. But that becoming the smaller reason to be drinking any alcohol. So for me, it was in this time of returning to beer drinking. I think it was the IPA that is the type of beer that started to feel complex to me in a way that, as a beverage of not just being thirsty and looking for something to drink, but as something that I sought in the way that I might seek food, it was like that. So it's interesting to me because I didn't know that there were the region in which we live in happens to lend itself to that sort of brewing differently. When you think about like Tower Station, Mother Road's, home run. I mean, the Beer Research Institute
Hmm.
is a place in which we've spent time with. We've done a dinner with those guys, and they seem to have like a wide variety of different types of beers. I mean, there's the
Yeah.
coffee culture that they have. I mean, there's a lot of. It's not just IPAs. There's a whole bunch of things.
No, yeah. I would say that IPA is kind of the bedrock of modern Arizona brewing. Um, but yeah, I'm not like a big Goes fan or sour fan.
Hmm.
Um, but they're huge here. Like the sours are Arizona's one of the top with as far as variety of sour beers.
Hmm.
Arizona's like at the top. It's unreal. Like,
Oh, really?
yeah,
Huh.
there's so many varieties, and if you look at all the very prominent breweries, they all have sours,
Okay.
and gozes, and that's a big deal here. So there's obviously a huge market for it. I know a lot of folks who like them. It's just for me, it's not. I mean, I can drink one every now and again, but it's not like something I drink every time I go have a
Yeah.
beer.
Yeah. Right.
But yeah, the variety, like just if you look at Santan alone, like their Devil's Pale Ale is
Yeah.
probably
Right.
one of the most popular. Um, there's some great breweries in Flagstaff who do, or well, and in Tucson as well. Like probably one of the most famous or infamous beer cans is the Barrio Blonde,
Oh, right. Yeah, yeah.
out of Tucson, which is cool. They're the first brewery in Arizona, I believe, and that's currently open that uh turned over ownership to its employees. So it's an employee-owned brewery now.
Wow.
And yeah, it's they've got some great beers. They've got a great IPA, the Citrozona. But their blonde is off the charts phenomenal. If you think of probably the most sold beer in Arizona is Four Peaks Kilt Lifter, which
Right.
is a Scottish red.
Yeah.
So, so I mean, and Kilt Lifter is kind of like the Budweiser of Arizona. I don't mean that in a critical way of Kilt Lifter. It's much better than Budweiser.
Yeah.
My point is it's so ubiquitous because
Yeah.
it's almost like anyone who comes to visit here for spring training, it's like, oh, I gotta have that. I gotta have a Kilt Lifter. That's so cool. Like it's a great brand, like
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
whole, and it's a great beer. It's a great, easy drinking beer. And all of the breweries have, we have 3 atrocious months in Arizona, and they cater to that. They know that you need an easy drinking, light, crisp beer.
Yeah.
So the blondes and the lagers are still at every brewery.
And I
So
think,
yeah.
yeah, I mean, as we mentioned, employee ownership in a brewery and the difference between incredibly aggregated systems that produce commodities that are uh, reduce the number of true choices, the thing,
Mhm.
the variety of things versus what we're talking about, something that begins with something grown suitable to the local environment and then is transformed, by a local artisan. And brewers, as far as I'm concerned, like winemakers, are artists, and, transform with the artist's work and the agricultural work that come together and then are producing these really incredible variety of options for us, and then being brought to us in these bespoke places. I mean, the Beer Research Institute is a cool place to go
Mhm.
as well. I mean, so you can get the beer and take it, but you now have something that comes into the world because of somebody's personal imagination more than like a corporate um, response to focus groups. I mean, and out of that, I think creates a very interesting dynamic between the product, the person, the place. And because it's delicious, again, this is sort of underpinning a lot of my uh, opinions about like the virtuous cycle. You also end up with the best tasting thing. And listen, if you're going to drink beer, I think that if we did a study that there are relative health benefits to that as well. So, okay, if the wheat being grown is healing the soil in Arizona because the roots are deep, which are suitable for a dry climate, and actually the production of the raw materials that make the beer actually save water. I feel like the long upstream impact is that if you're drinking beer, this beer is actually better for your physical health as well. I don't know. You may
Well,
feel like I'm taking that too far, but that's
no,
that's what I'm sticking to.
remember that guy, Dr. Oz?
Sure. Yeah.
What is it? You Want a Diet or something? That was like his seminal book.
Right. Right.
And he was on Oprah and all that. So my wife had me listen to that about a decade ago. I listened to the audiobook. And I learned a few things when I was listening to it. One of the things he talked about was beer and the true health benefits of the types of sugars that beer has, the maltodextrin and all that.
Hmm.
And I remembered that. And it helps justify when I'm having that third beer. I think of Dr. Oz and I say, "Oh, well, yes, I'm doing my body well here." But I think you're right, Pete, and the quality of the beer, the flavor, and the atmosphere in which it's being consumed are all important. And that has to be world class. And just like we talked about, our wines are world class. We're going to go into distilling in
Hmm.
another episode. I believe that's world class. The but brewing here, beer brewing and craft beers, I would say it's still in the world of alcoholic beverages in Arizona, it's still at the top of the heap. I
Right.
mean,
Yeah.
we're a great beer state.
Hmm.
and there's almost nowhere you can go anymore. Uh, I have family who has a place in Pine Top up in the White Mountains by Sholo, and there's a great brewery up there. Almost every little community or town has a great brewery now, and so there's so many opportunities. But the enclaves of brewing are um, incredibly Gilbert, Arizona,
Yeah.
Tucson, Arizona, and Flagstaff. Those are where, but then you've got great brewing in Sedona, Cottonwood, Prescott. It's really, there's almost
Well,
nowhere you can go that it's not
100,
great.
109 companies. Well, look, I'm so grateful for the people who have taken the plunge into these businesses, because they've made our communities so much richer for having looked to have a local option against all these types of beers, and that the ones that have been so sensitive to the idea of like, well, how do I um, improve the state? When you're working with your local farmers, there's an economic exchange there that just looks different than buying commodity that comes from wherever. So it's just much like what we spoke about in wine, and we've talked about with Eric in terms of distribution. So many good things come out of these people's commitment to creating something unique that's of our place. And I'm sure as it grows over time and other people find out about these there will be winners like Four Peaks. Like, I can understand when Four Peaks was sold, people feeling bad about like, oh, the loss of some local culture. However, I'm sure it was a terrific day for the people that did that transaction. So I don't think anybody should begrudge okay, local success becoming regional success, becoming national success, and that there's certain business realities that follow that um, are just part of, I think, a natural progression. But you know, underneath that big canopy of success, I think also lends itself to encouraging other people, like, hey, you should go do this, because you don't really know where it could take you in the end. And now we have such a vital, rich, interesting set of brewers out there doing it.
Yeah, and Four Peaks, it's really cool now that so yeah, initially they were the first brewery I was introduced to when I started visiting out here.
Hmm.
And great, unbelievable beers. And when they sold to InBev, which is the parent company of Budweiser, Anheuser-Busch.
Right.
And what it did when I found out and started, and I met with their head brewer and some of the folks there when we were doing some beer, we did a beer dinner with them. I don't know if you remember that one,
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
at Farm Boy,
Oh,
and
right.
it was really cool. And we tapped one of their dank kegs as like the coup de grace or whatever, but
Hmm.
the grand finale. But when I was touring their main brewery, they said that what that did is InBev left them completely in creative control still.
Okay.
So
Okay.
so they have there's no they don't InBev does just wanted them to keep doing what they're doing. In fact, they wanted to double down on the creativity part. So
Interesting.
what InBev did was gave them HR, accounting, billing support, like all that administrative support they took off of Four Peaks plate
Hmm.
and allowed Four Peaks to devote its resources to brewing great beer. So as a result, they've increased the varieties that they have. They've also have this incredible, like world-class barrel aging program. So
Yes.
they're barrel aging all like they have barrel aged kilt lifter. Like
Hmm.
it's so cool. So they have this huge barrel room. I'm sure it's continuing to expand, but so that was as much as you could rail on the corporate thing, it really allowed them to be more innovative and focus on what they do best. So that was, that was a very heartening story that
Yeah.
They weren't diluted down like when Paradise Bakery got bought by Panera, and then now there's no more Paradise Bakeries.
Yeah.
The identity of Four Peaks is still Four Peaks.
Well, I'm really pleased because I didn't know that story. And
Yeah.
and when that transaction occurred, the there was a sentiment among certain folks out there like, this is how sad, like Arizona lost a voice in this world. But it sounds to me like there was people making some assumptions about what that transaction meant versus what it actually meant. And it sounds
Hmm.
like they actually empowered them to do more of what they want to do versus take away their ability to be
Yeah, that's
innovative. And so, I mean, that's pretty amazing. I don't know if
yeah,
that's
that's what it
usual, but
seems
that's
like.
awesome. Yeah.
That's what it seems like. But I would say that, if I don't know much about a lot of the good breweries. Like I was just thinking like, what are some other breweries I've been to but don't frequent?
Hmm.
Um, Wren House here I think in Tempe,
Hmm.
Oso
Sure.
is kind of a big family friendly type of deal. One of the best IPAs I've had is a small brewery near Tucson called Dragoon. And
Okay.
like there's I could name a lot of breweries. I think you were drinking church music the
Last
other
night.
day. Yeah. So there's so many great beers and they're becoming iconic beers.
Hmm.
But I'm drawn to Arizona Wilderness and Mother Road because they are very overt about they're trying to protect our ecology,
Yeah.
and they're both doing it in different ways. So Arizona Wilderness, we talked a little bit about their ingredients
Hmm.
are what they're focused on, and they do the same thing on their food menu. And one thing I wanted to mention, Pete, is a lot of these breweries, not all, but a lot of them are very food forward. They take
Yeah.
their food
Yeah.
seriously. So it's like, this is a great beer, where are we going to go eat? Like Arizona Wilderness, Santan Brewing, you can have great meals there. You don't
Yeah.
even have
That's
to
true.
have a beer.
Hmm.
And I do have one other topic after I touch on this that I want to talk about with regards to non-alcoholic.
Yeah. Tell
But
me.
the
Yeah.
but I want on this one note, like the amount of brewing, the volume of beer being produced here is astronomical.
Hmm.
Okay, there's a lot of beer. Let's just assume, for the sake of discussion, that there's not a lot of brewers in Arizona that are using the Arizona wilderness model of supporting local agriculture, protecting our ecology and our waterways, trying to reduce water consumption with responsible procurement and ingredient selections. But we have the volume.
Hmm.
So we've solved for the volume, we've solved for the quality and the popularity of Arizona craft brewing. I
Hmm.
don't I don't think 109, from what I understand, there's as many close as open every year.
Sure.
So obviously it's not lucrative for everybody,
Right.
but there's still, so it's kind of, it'll probably slow down in the growth of breweries,
Hmm.
but you know, the amount of beer being produced here is incredible. And that just, now it's about how do guys like us reach deeper into the beer brewing community, maybe through the Arizona Brewers Guild, to promote some of these grains and malts that can help reduce water use in agriculture in our state and in our region. And so that's very virtuous, but there's a lot of opportunity. We solved for the biggest issue, which is volume. If
Hmm.
there were 7 breweries, we wouldn't even it wouldn't even be worth talking about,
Right. Right.
because the purchasing volume would be so low. Um, so yeah, so that's a good problem to have. Now we just got to get into sourcing and building the local grain economy. And on that note, I was at the Arizona Good Food Forum in Tucson last week, which is put on by Local First Arizona. We hope to have Kimber Lanning on the show.
Yeah.
She's done an incredible job of building that organization, supporting small businesses here in Arizona, especially rural businesses. Well, our friend Don Guerra was the keynote speaker there, from,
Right.
founder of Barrio Bread. And he talked about, I didn't even realize this. So when he first started his bakery, I knew it was in his garage at his house, and he was a school teacher at the time. And he was baking bread and teaching school, and he had built up his business for 9 years in this garage. But when he first started, he was buying commodity flour, commodity grains, and making still wonderful bread, but it wasn't it wasn't until he met the folks at Native Seed Search here in Arizona that he started tinkering with the whites and Oren, and then he became like completely bought into what Barrio Bread has become, which is the model for local grain in probably the country or even the world. Like he's just set such a high bar for that. And but it's interesting. So if you relate that story here, James Beard award-winning baker, a couple decades later, who evolved from commodity grain into actually
Right.
converting cotton fields into Sonoran wheat in Tucson, in the Tucson area, then I think we can look at that same potential progression with breweries. Is, hey, we get it, you're buying commodity
Yes. Yes. Right.
grains,
Right.
but let's start talking about incorporating 10% white
Yes.
Sonoran,
Yes.
or Kernza or whatever. And so that's going to be a fun conversation for us to have. But Mother Road, their method is different. I think, I don't know what their procurement methods are, but they're more focused on supporting the wildlife, like natural resources and
Right.
wildlife.
Right.
So a lot of their focus goes towards preserving the ecology in that way in Arizona, which is just as important. So really cool breweries with missions. And I
Yes.
think
Yes.
one thing that they're not in such a hurry to export their beer, out of the state. They're more focused. I mean, there's so much volume in the state. It's like, well, yeah, let's just really make Arizona a phenomenal state for beer, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so
tell us a little bit, as we kind of come to conclusion, because this theme of in the spirits world of like a mocktail type of
mhm.
thing, in the beer world, their athletic brewing is the one that I'm aware of in the largest scope, but I think it's happening among our craft brewers as well, sort of a non-alcoholic beer, trying to compete on flavor uh, without the alcohol. Could you talk a little bit about what you're seeing out there?
Yes. And I'll start by saying this. I'll give you a little context. Of course,
Okay.
Pete, I can't just give you a straight answer, right? So I've been in the restaurant business my whole career, and years ago in DC, I had a chef who was trying to, you know, get off drinking. It had gone a little too far.
Okay.
And in the culinary industry that can happen. Um, so chefs and rock stars are somewhat similar in nature. So I was trying to support him, but he didn't want to stop going out to have a beer after we got off of work at midnight or whatever. It was kind of a thing, it's like you go out, you hang out. So we started encouraging bars around the restaurant that we operated to carry non-alcoholic beers that were better
Okay.
than like O'Doul's, right?
Right.
Like
Right. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
so we started getting into non-alcoholic beers, and they started bringing in these mostly German, like pretty good non-alcoholic beers where that's what we would drink.
Right.
And it was fun, and I got used to it. And then there was a long period of time when I moved out here that I wasn't even I would see O'Doul's at the grocery store, but I'd never buy it. Of course, it's garbage.
Mm.
But then I was meeting with the owners of Arizona Wilderness, and we with Dax, and we were
Mhm.
talking about grain, and they asked me to try a new beer that they were testing at the time called Arizona. So it's Arizona NA, non-alcoholic.
Oh. 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 Right. Right.
And they said, there's and part of it was personal for them. They were like, we've been drinking too much. We're in the brewing business, and we wanted the opportunity to still enjoy our beer, but not have to like be inebriated.
Sure. Sure.
So it was partly personal, and they had the transformation for them, and I think for other breweries in the state, has been that the process to remove the alcohol from beer was extraordinarily expensive,
Okay.
energy and water intensive before,
Okay.
similar to like decaf coffee. It's
Hmm.
a very expensive and intent and resource intensive process. And they didn't want to commit brewing space to this all the equipment that's needed to produce non-alcoholic beer. Well, fast forward to maybe a year and a half ago, um, that equipment has become much more available and the technology has become a lot better. And that coincided with their desire to not drink as much alcohol. So and the dry January
Sure.
phenomenon
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
been around for a while. And it's like, oh shit, my brewery's going to be dead in January, because all these
Yeah, right,
jokers
right, right.
are drinking in their closet. They can't show anybody that they're actually drinking in January. So so they created this Arizona beer and they were very particular. They did not want to compromise on their flavor standards and I can tell you that it's a great beer. Like and it's not just a dry January thing. Like if I'm there and meeting somebody for lunch, I'll have an Arizona.
Yeah, right,
And,
right.
and then it's like, no one knows. They don't give who if the guy next to you ordered an IPA because he's apparently got a job that he can do that at,
Yeah.
and I order in Arizona, I'm right there with him, but I'm just drinking non-alcoholic. I met my son there in January. I was doing the dry January thing, and he had a beer and I had an Arizona,
Yeah.
and they're great. In fact, I keep 4 or 5 in my beer fridge at all times. I'm whenever I go by there, I pick up a 4 pack.
Yeah.
So I
I'm
have
going
it.
to go do that too. I'm aware of it, but I haven't tried that. So that's one that will be new for me. I'm going to go. Um, and sadly, the I'll be what this is September of 2024. I'll be 54 later this month, and the relationship between the amount of alcohol in any given day and the quality of my sleep has become just painfully obvious to me. And so having a beer that has a quality of flavor minus the alcohol as an option for me would be something I have never found to the degree where I was like, oh, I'll go pick that. It sounds like this one, I might actually pick it on a flavor basis, not necessarily just because it doesn't have alcohol.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm no psychiatrist, or a psychologist, but I will say this, just personal experience. The act of pouring the beer into a glass, right?
Yes.
Or however you would normally drink it. It's in a nice can. It's in a craft beer can, but
Right.
I normally pour it into a glass and I'll drink that Arizona and it calms me down.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I think it's the
The ritual.
activity,
Yeah. The ritual of it. Yeah.
the
I agree.
ritual is what's important. And so, yeah, I mean, sometimes you want you want to have alcohol, right? Like you need to really get your mind off of things. You and I know that feeling, but in this case, if you're just want to just feel, go through the ritual, it's a fantastic replacement, and you don't feel like you're sacrificing anything. At least that's what I
Yeah,
felt.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm so excited to hear that. Well, I think you brought us full circle then. As Benjamin Franklin said to us, he says, fear is evidence that God loves us and wants us to be happy. I really love the way we're working our way through so many things about Arizona that not everybody, I think, knows. And if you're listening and you're local and you recognize some of the names that we mentioned in terms of places to go or beers to try, you're really going to love doing that. We encourage you to do that immediately. And we're going to give you the opportunity to get to know some of these people. We're going to talk with them, invite them on the show, and get to have you hear their stories directly so you can look forward to that in the future as well. But for today, Oren, I'm going to go stop in, get 4 pack of that Arizona myself, have it
Nice.
in here. So thanks for the tip. All
You
right,
got
brother.
it, man. Great talking as always, Pete.
As always. Okay, until next time.
Yep.